it is what it is. I will be bullied for it, but it's...
Oh, that's a great question. That's one that I asked myself as well.
For the World Economic Forum.
Well, a lot of it was actually like pretend play.
I think actually the interpersonal energy,
There's not actually
someone there. You don't get that. You don't receive that back.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why it like really energized me. And I was, whoa, this is what it feels like to love.
I was not good.
So
I was like the tallest one, the least flexible one. I didn't even care.
I look at more the emotional
Haven't shared, because either they're maybe too personal, where I think, oh, this is about a very specific person, and if someone would read this, they might know who, and it might sound a bit toxic, and it probably is. No, I think you were phrasing it very well, actually, because I feel that tension very deep. I've written a bunch of essays critiquing the World Bank, neo-colonialism, neoliberalism, and I got a bit disillusioned because Black Lives Matter movement, and I just felt anger at like the injustices of the world.
Yeah, learn by doing it. And what I realized, it's because, people are like, wow, you have a podcast. To those who've always had access to it, feels like exclusion.
Oh, that's a lovely question. A very good picking out key things in my life.
Boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to my podcast, Coffee's on me, David Quan, where I strive to give guests legacy-worthy interviews that listeners can enjoy while cooking, commuting, relaxing, or walking their pets. Well and truly amidst exam season in Cambridge, and my finals, which are worth 100% of my grades for my 3-year Cambridge degree, start in merely 3 days. But grabbing a cappuccino with my guest is a priority this morning. Perhaps since she studies my subject, this recording could be a revision supervision for both of us. For now, I feel incredibly blessed for reaching 10,000 podcast downloads several weeks ago. Please know that I don't take any of your time, feedback, and support for granted, because when I started this passion project podcast at a low point of my time in Cambridge, I was genuinely motivated by 3 founding ideals. Number 1, purpose of giving. Number 2, learning from others. And number 3, sharing of stories. These 3 aspirations still make up the content description for every single episode. Indeed, the opportunity to strive to give my courageous and insightful guests legacy-worthy interviews over coffee, tea, bubble tea, or water, despite my many inadequacies, have been a tremendous privilege that imbues me with gratitude. If you have been enjoying the discussions on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts, thank you. And please do consider leaving a review and nominating a guest by contacting me via my linktree, David Quan. Seeing this podcast on people's Spotify Wraps or receiving positive messages about the guests give me tremendous fulfillment. I genuinely maintain the deep conviction that this passion project, if wholly true to those founding motivations about giving, learning, and sharing, is a worthwhile pursuit. So now on to my very talented and important guest. Angelina Naujoks is a first-year undergraduate student at Homerton College, University of Cambridge, studying education, policy, and international development, EPID. While she is German and Swiss, she grew up in a small fishing village in France, moved to Zurich, and graduated high school in Hong Kong. Broadly speaking, she is passionate about improving the world. Her close interests lie with social educational policy, international development, and business. She has expanded on these interests by founding a podcast called On My Mind, catered towards youth, in which she interviewed changemakers who deal with issues important to our generation, such as racial inequalities, the mental health crisis, and sustainability climate issues. Additionally, she has been on the student leadership team of a Hong Kong youth empowerment charity and interned at various NGOs such as the Lego Foundation and International Bridge to Justice. She is also a budding poet who aims to capture the ups and downs of youth through words. Her poetry has been published in Cambridge's Bait magazine, used as a spoken word piece in dance productions, and been recited at various events. Angelina, very, very impressive experiences. Welcome to my podcast, Coffees on Me, David Quan.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm honored that you took out the time from your busy exam schedule to talk to me. So yeah.
Likewise, really appreciate it. How are you finding the exam period?
Yeah, good. I think the good thing about first year is, it doesn't count. So I feel like I can almost have a trial go at everything.
That's a bad mindset. It counts. No,
yeah. But no, I'm working hard, but I'm trying to keep the balance and do other things as well. So.
Maybe we could use the last part of the conversation discussing some of the papers, and as we were talking about, we did a lot of similar questions, and
absolutely.
It'd be interesting to capture your current intellectual thought. So we're currently in May, and I was wondering, what was on your mind for the 7th of May, which is a special day, your sister's birthday, what did you do this year?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, actually, I feel bad because I would have loved to spend the day with my sister. But, you know, I called her, and yeah, my sister's someone who means a lot to me. She's only 10 years old, so there's a big age gap between us. But she's someone who, you know, obviously completely changed my life. Like, I wished for my sister all my life, and I wrote, you know, poems about her and stuff. So 7th of May is a special day for me, even though I couldn't be with her that day.
So that poem, I believe, is The Day Turned Spring. And in that video, you shared how your biggest dream was to have a little sibling.
Yes.
Why?
So, you know, I grew up and I was quite a lonely child. I'm not going to lie. I was quite creative, right? I had to kind of entertain myself. So, I would actually pretend I had siblings, and people thought it was a little bit weird. I can't lie, but you know, and then when she was born, actually, the funny thing is, in the first week, I felt completely neglected, and I actually cried, and I was like, "Mom, you don't love me anymore," and she was like, "No, it's just because there's a newborn here." But yeah, I think it was just, I was bored, to be honest. And what I find, I think, with most only children that I talk to is that everyone has that phase of wanting, you know, a sibling, and then oftentimes you kind of grow out of it. But yeah, no, so I'm blessed that she's in my life.
So, as you were growing up, you being 8 years older, at kind of what age did you start to feel like you were able to kind of play together a bit more, like?
Interesting enough, it's actually now more than anything. I think now, because she's 10, she's starting to, you know, develop her own like personality. I would say she's quite a sassy person. And it's just really cool witnessing her turn into, you know, like someone with a character. And I think now I'm starting to really be able to have good conversations with her, although obviously, you know, they're not the same kind of conversations I have with my friends. But yeah, I'm enjoying this time now.
That's wonderful. I guess for you, what really stands out is just how you've grown up in different cultures and different places. Could you maybe just give a rough timeline of, you know, at what age you were where and that kind of stuff?
Yeah. Okay, so again, I grew up in France. It was near Geneva, because my mom worked in Geneva, so she commuted. And I went to a French local primary school for the first 8 years of my life. And then I moved to Zurich. And I think the biggest shift there is that I then attended international school. So from the ages of 8 to 14, I lived in Zurich, was in an international school. That's where I learned English, because before that I couldn't speak English. And then at 14, I moved to Hong Kong and did the last 3 years of high school there. So that's kind of roughly the timeline.
That's wonderful. I think the phrase is like TCK, third culture.
Third culture, yeah.
Lots of them mention that because they've grown up in different cultures, the advantage is that they see different people, different perspectives. But perhaps the downside is that you don't really feel like you're at home anywhere. Did you feel that way at all?
Absolutely, yeah. I constantly have the crisis of feeling like I don't really have a set home, and especially because my family moved to Singapore actually after I graduated. And so when I visit them, I go to Singapore, but Singapore doesn't feel like home because I don't have friends there. I don't know people there. So yeah, it's, I mean, you know, I don't want to sit here and lament like, oh, it's so difficult. But yeah, sometimes I do wish that you know, when I look at my peers and like when they go off for a break, you know, they all say, oh, I'm going home. And I just don't feel like I can really say that. So it's tough, but it is cool being able to obviously speak different languages through that and connect with people on kind of different levels because of those experiences.
What does home mean to you then?
I think home, what I've learned is that for me, home is, where my family is. I think now more so where my grandparents are as well. I think because my family is obviously, my immediate family is in Asia. If I'm in Europe, I'll go to my grandparents' house, and that's been a really cool experience to be able to kind of spend some time one-on-one with them, learn about their life, and I viewed that as my home actually, where my grandparents are.
That's wonderful. And do you mind sharing maybe why your family moved? Obviously work, but do you mind elaborating a bit more on what kind of work, and was it a predictable change, or do they just take up opportunities as it comes along?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So, well, my dad is a consultant, and what happened essentially was, I think my parents getting a little bit bored of Zurich, because while it's a great city, it is very insular. It's a bit of a bubble, and it's almost utopian. And I think they wanted to have a new experience. And so it wasn't a forced move. I think there was a opening and my dad decided to take it. And, when they told me we were moving, I was really excited, actually. I was like, I'm excited to get out of Zurich. While I love the city, it feels a bit repetitive. And I was really, really excited to just get a completely new experience.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And does your family have this culture of just like, let's keep trying something new and let's not be stagnant?
Yeah, I think so, for sure. And that's something that, has inspired me. But so, for example, my mom and dad are very different in the sense that my dad grew up the first 25 years of his life in Munich. So he grew up in the same place, same city, most of his life. My mom, however, because my grandpa is a diplomat, grew up partially in Central America. So she grew up in the Dominican Republic, Nicaragua. And so for her, I think that kind of international, lifestyle, moving around a lot, experiencing new things was something that she valued. And I think she kind of brought that into the family.
How did they meet?
So they met at work, actually, at the company that my dad's still at.
Consulting?
Yeah, Bain. That's where they met. And actually, funnily enough, they went to the same university, but didn't know each other while they were at the university. So they only met afterwards, yeah.
Wow. Did they then do a consulting project together then?
Yeah, I think so.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I'm sure we'll touch on the intersections of international development, business and consulting, and their increasing kind of neoliberalization and everything.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Okay. And when you were kind of in primary school, what kind of things did mum and dad encourage you to do, to think, and to be?
Yeah, so now that I think of it, my dad, he was traveling a lot while I grew up. He wasn't there most of the weekdays, so he was influential in my life, but in a different way. I think my parents were quite, I'd say, hands-off in a way. I think as a kid, I was just doing a lot of what I was interested in. I did the classic, I played tennis, I played the piano, I did, those classic hobbies. But yeah, no, I was, I really enjoyed creative writing, actually. I'd write little books and stories. And I'd love, especially, writing in French. And I think my parents enjoyed the fact that I was able to speak both German, French, but also Spanish, because I had a nanny at the time and she was Spanish. So she was also a huge influence in my life, actually. So yeah, it's interesting to see all these. You
learned Spanish by almost not coincidence, but as a byproduct of
yes.
that, which wasn't even intended. Let's get her a Spanish nanny to learn Spanish.
Yeah, that wasn't the intent. I think it's my nanny, she was from Bolivia, actually, and she, I think because both my parents were working full time, and so she was kind of my primary caretaker for a while, and so I learned Spanish through that, which is just cool, because I still speak a little bit of Spanish now. It's faded, but I can understand almost everything and speak a little bit. Yeah.
So what's the main language at home then? English?
German, yeah. My parents have very much instilled it in me to continue speaking German, because they're realizing that I would say now my English is my dominant language. It's better than my German, and I feel more comfortable having conversations in English. However, German is always my mother tongue, and every now and then there are words that will only come up to me in German. So,
yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. And you mentioned how your parents traveled a bit. I guess being a management consultant is very project based, and I think pandemic may have changed things, but before then it's very much leave Monday and then come back Thursday. Does that mean that you only kind of spent time with your parents on weekends?
Mostly, yeah. I think my dad's job was a bit more intense in the sense that we were living in France, but he was mostly working in Germany. So he was pretty much gone from Monday to Thursday, Friday. My mom, she would commute, but, you know, she was quite busy at that time. She worked for the World Economic Forum. So she was commuting a lot. She was busy. So yeah, I don't resent them at all for it, but I didn't see them that much. And that's why I think I had to be quite creative and imaginative, because I had to, you know,
and you're not myself. Seeing them quite as much. Is that your whole childhood, or?
I would say from ages like until 8, like when we lived in France, it was like that. And then when we moved to Zurich, and when my sister was born, my mom was obviously more active and more at home. So I think then it changed slightly. Yeah, and now my mom is not working full time anymore, so she's spending a lot more time with us and my sister. Yeah.
And you and your nanny, have you messaged her recently? Are you still in contact?
Yeah, we're not in close contact anymore, but actually I had the privilege of visiting her in Bolivia in 2018, which was such a cool experience. And she's a person that while I do definitely want to reconnect with her, but you know, while we've grown apart, she's tremendously like shaped my childhood. And I'll always be grateful for having that figure in my life.
What were, as a child, what kind of, how did you play? You know, was it board games? Was it playground? Was it nature? Was it writing poetry? Like, how did you entertain yourself?
Oh, that's a great question. I think, well, a lot of it was actually like pretend play. Like, I loved pretending I had, I don't know, siblings, or I would pretend I was like a mom, and I was driving my kids to school or something. I had a bike that I would ride a lot. I would pretend I was a teacher, actually. And I would, like, you know, draw random nonsense equations on a board. And so I loved having that kind of, I think, like, almost interactionist type of play, except there wasn't anyone else there. Or sometimes I'd make my dad play, like, restaurant with me. So I would be the cook or something, and then he'd be, like, the waiter. So, yeah.
Did you invent the scenarios, like, or was it based on, like, things that have happened in your life, if that makes sense?
That's a good question. I think a lot of it, interestingly enough, was, also stuff I invented, but also stuff that I saw around me. So, for example, when I would, you know, play mom, I'd get inspired by, like, the French moms around me, kind of. And funnily enough, like, there's this, it's a bit of a stereotype, but French parents can be quite strict. So when I would... when I'd like play pretend, I'd pretend to be this very strict parent. And another one that I loved as well was playing, like pretending I was at the airport and I was at the check-in counter. And then apparently, I don't really remember this, but my parents were telling me this, that apparently I would like deny people boarding. So I'd be like, no, you cannot get on this flight. So I was quite creative with it.
Did you pretend to be an admissions officer?
That would have been that. University wasn't quite on my mind yet. Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. But it sounds like very cool and perhaps eerie that a lot of the things that you pretended actually came true. So do you believe in like manifestation?
I think so. I think so. I don't know. I'm not a hugely spiritual person, but I do believe in kind of thoughts.
Love how you're staring at the Bible while you're saying
like, oh. No, but I have this habit of, before I go to sleep, I'll always write like my to-do list or my visions for the next day kind of thing, because I feel like I need to be able to kind of visualize what I want to get done so that I actually get it done. Yeah.
On spirituality, which is a poem that you've written.
Yes,
actually.
It's true.
Do you mind if I read it out?
No, go ahead.
Sure, I won't read it out with the eloquence that you could, but I thought it's nice. No. I really enjoyed reading it. You wrote, I want kindness to become my religion. The kind of kindness that feels like someone has reached down your throat gently, somehow, and lifted your lungs, so that for the first time in a long, long time you take a deep breath. Assisted breathing, if you will. The kind of kindness that momentarily astounds you, because how on earth can a smile directed to you be this beautiful? So you engrave it in memory, a personal gift, for you to keep in the back pocket of your jeans. Let easier breath and pretty smiles become the fabric of every day. what we wash ourselves with, so it seeps into our skin, infects us. What does kindness mean to you growing up, and how has other people's kindness shaped your upbringing?
Oh, that's a lovely question. I think what kindness means to me, and it's taken on a new meaning coming to university, where there are times I think everyone experiences, you just feel loneliness. And sometimes, as I wrote in that poem, like a simple smile or like a simple gesture can mean more than, words, for example. And I think, growing up, I always had a very kind, obviously, home environment. My parents, I would say, are, very, very kind. I had the privilege of having really good teachers that shaped me. So yeah, I think kindness for me is something that I try and give as much as possible, because what I notice is, when you put out kindness, you receive that back, kind of. It's a two-way street.
Why is that?
Ooh, good question. I think part of it is, it's very much, energy and vibes. And I find when someone is so kind and like selfless, because obviously there's a difference between being kind but also protecting yourself and your own boundaries. But I find when someone can strike that right balance of just sharing, of noticing others, of including people, you're drawn to that person, right? Like you want to be around that kind of person. And I think that's something that I aspire to want to do, and make people feel included and loved.
That's lovely. Yeah, I agree that kindness is beautiful. It can be small, but nevertheless very significant.
Yeah.
It's almost like, I thought a lot about like concepts like forgiveness and everything. It's like, for example, like forgiveness doesn't mean that you forget about what's happened. It just means that you recognize that other people are imperfect and that you can move on. And forgiveness doesn't mean that it isn't important anymore. It just means that it is important, in fact.
Yes.
And kindness as well, I find, it's very much like, it doesn't mean that you let others walk over you and be a doormat.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, you being kind and forgiving doesn't preclude you from also fighting for yourself and standing up for yourself and criticizing and diagnosing problems. So that's really fascinating. So as you were doing like the pretend play, there's actually a third year education paper called Play, Creativity and Imagination, which you would probably enjoy.
Yeah. That's cool.
Would you say like you were more focused on like the material reality or the interpersonal energy?
Ooh. I think actually the interpersonal energy. I think I was quite in general, I'd consider myself an extrovert. I have introvert tendencies, but I get all my energy from connecting with people and from interacting with people. And well, obviously, if there's not actually someone there, you don't get that, you don't receive that back. I think it's that idea of being able to kind of express yourself, and being able to kind of shape your own imagination and your own reality, and like immerse yourself in your own little reality. I really enjoyed that part of it.
And when did your love for writing, poetry, creativity commence?
Oh, great question. Well, as I mentioned, as a kid, I did write actually some poems. I mean, they were obviously terrible, but I would write some poems. I wrote like stories. And then I would say that kind of faded for a bit, and I wasn't really into writing or poetry. I think sometimes, unfortunately, English can kind of kill people's interest in poetry because it's presented in a very like sterile way, and the emotional aspect, unfortunately, is divorced from like the form and the structure. But yeah, I think around like 2-3 years ago, it was actually through English class, because we were reading some poems, and I started kind of writing some of my own, and then I tried kind of honing that skill. I didn't have a poetry teacher or someone who taught me how to write good poems, but I tried reading more, and that was, I think, the main way that I tried teaching myself, basically. And
when you started your poetry account, Poems You Should Read, you posted a lot from Maya Angelou.
Yeah.
Who were your kind of creative role models or inspirations?
Yeah, great question. So there's one poet who I would say really sparked my interest, and that was Dana Smith. And he writes on, and this was actually at the time of the like police brutality, Black Lives Matter movement, like when it reached its height. And I read it's what is it called? Don't Call Us Dead is what the poetry collection is called. And what struck me about it was the kind of deep, like, political and activist undertones, right? And that's when I realized, poetry isn't just pretty words on a page, it carries meaning. And it can carry kind of greater socio-political meanings. It can also carry very personal meanings, but the ability to kind of have both of those on the page, I think really struck me. I also started listening to a podcast, actually, a poetry podcast called Poetry Unbound. And that one also really sparked my interest in poetry because the guy who runs it, he'll read out a poem from someone else, and he'll basically analyze it, but in such a profound way, and not dry at all, not like English literary analysis, but just in a very like beautiful way, and that also really helped me spark my creativity.
That's wonderful. And when you read poems, I guess sometimes, like, the metaphors and the underlying meaning doesn't jump out immediately. Part of the beauty, I think, of poetry is that you can revisit the words, and as you gain more life experiences, you interpret things differently. So when you get a piece of poetry, you obviously read it through, but what's your process of truly understanding the depth and nuance behind it?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, funnily enough, I kind of I tutor like in poetry analysis and like literature a little bit. So I kind of go about it in sometimes when I read it for personal pleasure, I kind of I read it through, I underline lines that, appeal to me. I look at more the emotional aspect of it, I think, the more personal. And oftentimes, actually, if there's a poem that I just feel like doesn't appeal to me, I'll read maybe the first stanza and then move on, right? Like I pick out things that speak to me. But obviously, when I do the more, literary analysis side of it, like I'll go through it very meticulously. I look at, okay, what's the metaphor here? What's the imagery? What's the structure, like in a very kind of structured way, yeah.
And when you write poetries, what kind of mood are you in usually?
Oh, that's a great question. That's one that I ask myself as well, because I never quite know when that inspiration or when that like tickle to write a poem hits. It can be very random, and I find oftentimes it's been sadly enough it's usually been more so negatively driven, like if I'm, I don't know, upset about like a romantic situation in my life, or I'm missing somebody. Usually that's what actually sparks it. So oftentimes
it's quite common, actually.
Yeah, and I think it's true because negative emotions oftentimes we feel them more strongly than we do positive
negativity
emotions.
bias.
Yeah.
And what would you say are, like, you obviously mentioned emotions and what you prioritize, but are there any like particular themes of poetry that you either like reading or writing about?
So actually I noticed this because I used to not do highlights on my poems account, and then I thought, what if I tried categorizing my poetry, right? And I realized that I had subconsciously basically created little categories. So what I realized I enjoy doing is adding a lot of like nature imagery and metaphors. I write a lot about like growing up and youth and nostalgia, a kind of romance, heartbreak, those are, or like passion. Those are some of my, what I've noticed, big themes. They're also the ones that I usually enjoy reading about. Although sometimes I find I do enjoy reading about something like friendship. I find can be a really beautiful, like poetic kind of inspiration as well. Yeah. What's
a poem or stanza or idea that you've perhaps gone back to over and over?
There is a poem by Roger Robinson called A Portable Paradise, and I would say it's probably one of my favorite poems because essentially the gist of the poem, and I recommend to listeners to read it. But essentially the poem is about always keeping this little portable paradise on you, and it says, I think in the poem, like in your back pocket. And I just think that's such a beautiful line, like the idea that despite everything you always have to protect that little like bubble of peace inside of you.
That's wonderful. And when you actually like read out the poems and when you film the videos and share it, why? Like, what? Like, is it just to share the joys? Is it also, I guess, also partly for you to express yourself? But like, walk me through the thinking process or the emotion behind, from reading a poem, analysing it, to sharing it to the wider world.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, obviously, there's actually a lot of poems that I've written that I haven't shared because either they're maybe too personal, where I think, oh, this is about a very specific person, and if someone would read this, they might know who, and I don't. So sometimes it's a bit too personal in that sense, although part of poetry is being vulnerable. I think, being brutally honest, a little bit of it was like maybe like a narcissistic tendency of like, oh, people enjoy this. Oh, I'm getting like good kind of feedback. People are telling me I'm good. Like this is new, because I think if I didn't share it, I'd have no idea if I was a quote unquote good poet or not. Like I'd have no idea. Genuinely just getting some feedback and knowing of like, does this resonate with people? I think that was one of my big like questions that I was looking for. And then also maybe because it gives me a purpose to write like better poems, because I think, hey, other people might read this. So just like think just that much further about what kind of imagery could you use in this? What kind of metaphor? Like how can you just elevate this a little bit more? I think that was part of the reason why I started sharing, and then it just kind of became this thing where like it's a part of a reason why I do write it. Yeah.
So would you say poetry is more of a means to an end, or an end in itself for you?
Ooh, in a way, both. I think writing a poem, when I finished writing a poem, it's deeply satisfying because it's like a little creation of your own that's not academic, right? It's not, oh, I've just written an essay or, I don't know, completed something. It's really, I've made this little piece of art. And I guess, I don't know if, I'm not personally not like a visual artist, but maybe I think I can imagine like painting or finishing a painting, it has a similar sense of satisfaction. And in that way, I think it's an end. But it also is obviously just a way for me to express myself, to put like, kind of a confused mess into like pretty words, So, yeah.
That's great. I'm sure that as you go through life and experience more up and downs, the poetry will complement that life progress, which is really beautiful. And I think it's such a cool talent to have, to be able to be vulnerable and to feel emotion, which I think is a real privilege, to feel things as deeply as you do. That's wonderful. Okay. What's so I guess like if we think about your high schooling, as you kind of, as you were saying with your sister, like now that she's 10, she's building her personality's coming out.
Yes.
What were other hobbies that helped your personality to come out?
Ooh, you know what, actually, it's an interesting question, because I think, as I mentioned earlier, my parents kind of pushed me into hobbies, and they were the hobbies that they did, right? So they were like, okay, you're going to play the piano and play tennis. And while I enjoyed those, I realized that now, at least being at uni, I realized that I never really questioned why I was doing them. It was always just this, oh yeah, okay, my parents kind of signed me up for this when I was young, so I'm just going to continue doing this. But I don't know if I ever felt real passion for, especially because at some point I stopped playing piano, but I continued playing tennis up until uni. And I just don't know if I really ever felt that real passion for it. And now that I've kind of, I'm by myself and I can choose what I want to do more so, and I'm doing rowing, I realized I feel a completely different passion towards it.
Being converted into the cult.
Yeah, no, I know. You can, I make My friends make fun of me every day for this, but you know what? It is what it is. And I will be bullied for it, but it's fine. But I just realized like, oh wait, this is what passion actually feels like. Like there was a time where I just really didn't enjoy going to tennis lessons. It was like a chore. It was like, oh, I have to go. With rowing, most of the time that's not the case. I will say when you have to wake up at 5:30, it's the passion can fade a little bit.
It's almost like you didn't even know you were missing out on this feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why it like really energized me. And I was just like, whoa, this is what it feels like to love a sport, really. So actually, I think it's in a way I realized that I missed out in that sense. On maybe like what you'd call traditional kind of hobbies.
But I guess like, I'm a believer that things happen for a reason.
Yeah.
And I do think even those tennis and piano experiences would have given you some valuable memories and skills, transferable skills.
Absolutely.
May have even helped your IB and the IB learner profile.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and to be fair, I did do stuff I enjoyed. Like towards the end, I was dancing a lot. I did contemporary and hip hop. And I was not good. Like, I was in a class with kids that were 3-4 years younger than me. So I was like the tallest one, the least flexible one. But I didn't even care. Like, I loved it. And I think that's one of those moments where I did feel that kind of passion. And I thought, I love dance. Like, this is kind of like poetry in a way, something where I can express myself and... So
with all these different hobbies, like if you had a birthday party when you were like 16, like how many people would you have invited, and what kind of proportion of people would be from dance, would be from music, would be from school, would be from, I don't know, poetry or whatever? Like how would you give me the demographic of who you hung out with?
Oh, that's a great question. Actually, so when I was 15, 16, that's when I first moved to Hong Kong. And because of COVID, I didn't really have many friends, actually. That was probably I think if I look back, it was probably the hardest year of my life. Also because I was dealing with family health issues, which was really tough. And being a completely new environment plus COVID made it very, very difficult to make good friends. I also think the school that I went to, while, academically gave me some great opportunities, was very different from my old school, in the sense that there was a very different like mentality around academics. People were so much more driven. So yeah, I think at that time I probably would have had like 2-3 friends that, were kind of like my buddies when I first came into the school. and that's the honest answer. I think at that point in time it was, didn't have that many friends.
How would they have described you as a new kid coming in?
Oh, probably like, shy, calm.
Really shy?
Yeah. I think so. I would say I was quite different when I was 15. I wasn't able to kind of open up as quickly to people or just be as like bubbly as I am now, maybe.
And how would your teachers have described you? I don't want to like hype myself up, but generally, like, I think they're probably next big thing.
Yeah, no, but I think
she's a real deal.
Like responsible, organized, driven. I think those are words I've heard from teachers a lot, and I think most people at Cambridge probably have heard those words from their teachers.
But how did you see yourself then? Like basically we've talked from other people's perspective, but for you moving into a new environment, having parents who are so high achieving, having all these different talents that perhaps at the time you didn't really know how it all fitted together, what were your goals? What were you aiming for? And who were you in this world?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think it's an interesting one because when I was younger, I wasn't ever like in the, cool group or with the popular kids, like, how those high school cliques formed. And so I always felt, and this, might sound a bit toxic, and it probably is, but I always felt like I had to distinguish myself in some way. So I was like, I have to be the academic smart one then if I'm not going to be the cool one, right? Like I saw it as two very binary things, which obviously now being here, I'm like, wow, like you can be cool and smart. But I always just saw it as like, okay, if I'm not going to be the cool one, I have to be the smart one. So I think I very much defined myself by that, put myself in that box. And in Zurich, I mean, I liked my school, but I'm going to be honest, people weren't that academic or driven in it, most people. And then when I moved to Hong Kong, it was a whole different environment because, just the amount of drive and talent and competitive environment was so different. And I thought, okay, I can either, kind of sink or try and float to the top and like push myself, sink or swim kind of thing. And I think I went for the kind of swim option, I guess. And I pushed myself really hard. And I was never actually the best in my school in Hong Kong. Like, I definitely wasn't. I was in the, like, maybe top 10%, but I was not at the very top. And I accepted that. I was like, that's okay.
Only top 10% of the time.
No, because, people were very, very smart. And just more so, just driven as well. Yeah.
So was the IB, did you see that more of a challenge or an opportunity or a bit of both?
Oh, I think both, actually. Yeah. On one hand, obviously, before IB, everyone makes the joke, like, don't do IB, you'll hate it. You're like, it's terrible. So you hear that. But obviously, and, if I look back, especially at my course combination, I could have chosen much easier courses. I could have not done biology higher level because I'm not doing a science degree. I decided to do French literature, which French is not my mother tongue. And I knew that, getting a 7, which is the highest grade, would be almost impossible with that, especially because I did self-study. So I had to, basically we had to get like an external tutor to do it. So in my mind, I'm like, I could have just done French, like language B, and made life easier for myself. But I always felt I always wanted to challenge myself. And I was like, what if I just do it and see what happens? And I did all right. So it wasn't terrible.
I found, in retrospect, IB was the most disciplined I've ever
Oh,
been.
yeah, same.
So much to manage that. It was so daunting, but so fulfilling. And I found that even though I put a lot of hours, obviously weekends and holidays, like every day felt like it was for IB. But it was like, I didn't feel that tired because you had such a diverse range of subjects that, you would be doing English and then you move to a science. And I guess by categorization, you do a first language, second language, humanities, math, a science, and a sixth subject. And I just think it's such a well-designed program and it makes you value that holistic development of, creative action server, TOK, 4,000 word essay, and for the extended essay, which felt like a lot, but now I'm just like, massive for essay.
Now I think, it's true.
But I think that's when I remember like having like a talk lesson and the teacher just kept on going like, well, how do you know? Why is sky blue? Are you sure? And I think we all walked out like, we were all kind of being a bit pricky. Like, how do you know then? Well, how? So I think IB, at least for me, when I think back, was a time when I've really just matured and became very critical. And I think I've never used the word perspective more than... Oh, but from another perspective, from that perspective, how did you feel like the breadth and depth and international nature of the IB influence how you see the world now or your worldview? Or
that's a great question. I think, if I'm, directly comparing it, because obviously a lot of my friends here did A-levels, and what I notice is just I'm grateful for IB in the sense that I feel like I have a little bit of knowledge in kind of everything or, in a broader range of subjects. Like I know random like biology things that, funnily enough, every now and then comes in useful. Like you wouldn't expect it, but every now and then you're like, oh look, I do remember this. And I think more than anything, it's also just the people that take IB are mostly, quite driven, but also well-rounded and have a wide kind of range of interests and are good at kind of different things. And like you said, I love being able to go from like, okay, I'm analyzing a poem here to then I'm doing maths, right? And I appreciate that because it also teaches you to think in different ways because you have both like still kind of that scientific thinking, looking at, evaluating studies and writing lab reports and things like that, while also maybe having the more creative analytical thinking. And I think it's more so the different modes of thinking that you put yourself in.
And also there's internal assessment, IAs, like you actually had to design your research question experiment, which is actually challenging,
really challenging. And or things like, I remember the math IA was, I was like, how am I supposed to just write a 12-page paper on a random mathematics? Like, I was
size 12 font.
Yeah, exactly. No, I thought it was way out of my kind of league. And then I did it and I was like, wow, wait, I just did this. I think IB pushes you to do things that you didn't really think you were able to do. And then through that, you kind of gain some confidence and you realize that, yeah, it's challenging, but I'm capable of more than I maybe give myself credit for.
Like it stretches but doesn't break you, is the phrase that we used.
I like that phrase, yeah.
I think that's when, because I had so much to manage, I really started to prioritize two things. Number one, like well-being and mental health, knowing that it's a marathon, not a race.
Yeah.
So I made sure I got my 8 hours of sleep. I made sure I got to bed on time. I was in a routine. I was exercising. And the second thing I learned was just how much collaboration, in addition, collaboration, not competition, was so important. Where you realise that you and your peers are actually comrades. Like you're in it together. Like if you treat it as a let me beat you, life's going to be pretty difficult.
That's very true. That's very true.
And also, like, I think that's when I first really started to seek advice from those graduates who had already done it, because they've been through it and they can tell you exactly what went well for them, what didn't go well. And obviously, no one person has the full truth, but when you hear perspectives from hundreds of different people, you start to figure out trends of yourself. And one of the things that they mentioned was that they all took year one of IB too lightly, because nothing counts. And then by year two, it's like, damn, like what we learned in year one actually counts. So having good notes is really important. And I think I realized that it wasn't about how like innately smart you were, but just how disciplined, how smart did you work that helped you. Did your habits change much as you tackled the challenges of IB?
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, I also really, I did become a lot more disciplined. I'd had quite a clear schedule of when am I going to work, but I also, I took time and had kind of my fun as well. Like I as I mentioned, I was doing tennis quite a lot, like 2-3 times a week.
Those CAS
hours, exactly. I was doing dance. Like I was actually quite busy. And what I noticed, I think this is what I like, my biggest lesson for myself is I'm the most productive when I'm busy. When I have set things in the day, I am actually productive. I will give myself an hour or two to work because I know, I have, I don't know, rowing or something today. So I'll give myself those 2 hours and I will, work and put my mind to it. If I have the whole day, I don't really get much done. Like I'm like, oh great, I have the day ahead, whatever. And that's something that I've learned about myself, is I need to stay busy to actually get things done and also feel fulfilled. Like after a busy day, I just feel so much more fulfilled than I do after a day of doing nothing, to be honest. But obviously those rest days are also important every now and then. Like I'm not a machine who can just like power through. Like I also do need that kind of rest every now and then. Yeah.
Is there anything about high school, obviously things worked out really well for you and I don't think it could have worked out any better, but if you were hypothetically to relive it, is there like one, even just a small thing that you would do differently?
Oh, that's a good question. I think maybe I would have said like, put less pressure on myself, but I also think that I needed a bit of pressure. Yeah, exactly. But I may not have gotten to where I am today. So
it's always like when people like tell like year sixes or year sevens that they miss out on a leadership role. It's like, it doesn't matter anyway. It's like, well, it does at the moment. Like it really does.
It does, exactly. And I think it's all relative, right, to what you experience at that time. And I think everything that I did kind of led me to where I am now, and like all the different projects that I did. So I don't know. And there's nothing immediate that comes to mind actually with that question.
It's a life well lived so far.
Yeah. I mean, I did make mistakes.
So you ended up getting a 43 out of 45. Most people, at least at my school, aim for a 40, which is seen as the elite range of IB.
Yeah.
What were you aiming for results-wise, or were you even focused on results at all?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, funnily enough, I was predicted a 43, and that prediction to me was like, oh my god, if I get a 43, like that would be, crazy. I was kind of, because my condition for Cambridge was 42, so I was like, at least a 42 would be great. And then funnily enough, I was predicted a 6 in maths. Ended up getting a 7, which I was like, this is wild. How? Because the whole like 2 years I was on the verge from like a 5 to a 6. So I could have only dreamt of a 7. Don't know how I pulled that out of the bag, but weird things happen. Yeah. And then funnily enough, it was on the TOK, like the 3 extra points, the TOK and the extended essay where I only got the 2 points. Oh. And that really upset me because...
You do B and B.
Yeah. Yep. And that really upset me because with the extended essay, I had put so much work into it. That's actually an essay that I sent to Cambridge as one of my written pieces. So I was a bit offended because I was like, well, Cambridge thought it was all right because I've been admitted. So why didn't the IB think it's all right? And actually... I think sometimes the IB doesn't necessarily reward intelligence. Yeah. It rewards like, I don't know
understanding the criteria.
Understanding the criteria, exactly. Because I find the more like the things that I put the most work into and that were maybe the most like complex didn't do as well as the simpler, like the math IA, which was quite simple, I did the best on. Whereas my other IAs, which were maybe just a little bit more, like my history IA, I put a lot of thought and effort into it, didn't do as well. And I think it's understanding the criteria and just being simple and straightforward. Yeah. And I think that was one of the things about the IB that kind of
bit of like structured
bothered me a little bit. Yeah, it felt sometimes too structured, which I understand why that you need
to standardize.
Yeah, but still it was like,
you will get your chance in second year, third year of this degree to criticize our standardized testing and everything.
Yeah, definitely.
That's fascinating. And yeah, I think for IB, I didn't really know. So for context, I got a 44. I was, even up until results day, I was thinking realistically I'm probably going to get anywhere between 37 to 45.
Oh, wow.
It was one of those things where I felt like every subject I could get a 7.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
In aggregate, I was like, no way I can get above 42.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But individually... I'll be disappointed if I don't get a 7.
Yeah.
But there's no way in total I'll get above a 42.
Yeah.
Because I didn't see myself in that light.
No, yeah.
I was actually predicted a 45.
Oh, wow.
But I didn't know that because my school didn't tell me.
Oh, interesting.
So super stressful. And when results day came out, IB called... So I got a 44 in there, so you can imagine I was like ecstatic.
Yeah.
Like, whoa.
Oh, yeah.
And then my IB coordinator was like, we're so like in a jokish manner, we're so disappointed. I was like, what do you mean? Because we predicted you a 45. I was like, what?
Oh my goodness.
But I guess like one of the other things about the IB, because it's only like out of 7, right? Mm-hmm. And like a 4 is a pass. Mm-hmm. And I just, on like Reddit IBO, I just read so much about people who miss out.
Yeah.
By like 1%, half a percent. And I was thinking, okay, well if I miss out on 1%, for all 6 subjects, then I go from a 45 to 39, which is a huge difference.
Yeah.
Was that like a worry for you at all?
Oh, huge worry. And actually, funnily enough, I kind of got like the flip side of the coin where I basically got 7s in 2 of my higher level subjects by like 2-3 points. I just scraped a 7. And I thought, okay, there was a bit of luck in that because if I would have dropped by just, a couple percentage points,
which is so
I would have gotten 6 in both of those subjects. Yeah, and that was for... Yeah, for history and English, I just got a 7. So I did realize, okay, there is a lot of luck in that, and that number is a bit, not necessarily arbitrary, but it's the grade boundaries change, and there's definitely a bit of luck involved.
Also, my friends got 43, and they were actually happier than me, I think, for most of the time. Because when we had our, recognition award ceremonies, people would come up and like, oh, what did you get? And then it would be for them, it would be like, oh, 42. Oh my God, you got above 40.
Yeah,
that's amazing. Or 43. Wow, that's incredible. Got to me, it's like, what did you get? 44. Oh, where did you lose your mark?
Yeah, that's true. Where did you lose your mark? Curiosity.
And then it was like standard level English.
Really? Oh, interesting.
But the only good thing
to be fair, I think English is, it's not
the only consolation I got was I missed a 7 in it by quite a bit, so it wasn't like I was like 1% off.
But
I was definitely, to be honest, probably naively quite bitter because partly practical because in Australia if you get like a 45 you get like full scholarships to Sydney, Melbourne. So I felt like okay, well I feel like I almost like deserved
the
opportunity at least.
I think with the 44 it's almost harder because you're that much closer to that 45.
Yeah. And
that's almost like, almost like, wow, 45. And then whereas 43, you think of it more as like, oh,
it's amazing.
Just above a 42 kind of thing. Like,
yeah. So did you have any like near misses that at the time was a bit like, it doesn't have to be IB, just life in general.
Ooh, life in general. I'm trying to think. Actually, I applied to the US as well for universities. And obviously I can't say if those are near misses or not because, the unis might have rejected me because, but I applied to the US and I wasn't that successful. I applied to 6 schools and I got into one.
Which one did you get in?
Northwestern.
Oh, well done.
And Northwestern, obviously, a great school, so I was ecstatic about getting into it. But I applied early decision to Duke.
Okay.
Which, in hindsight, I think is such a funny...
that's binding.
Yeah, early decision A is binding, right? So, in my mind, I think my life would have been so different because if I got in, I would have been at Duke now. And
Blue Devil.
Exactly, and Duke is... very different place.
Amazing basketball program.
Yeah. But very different place to Cambridge, right? It's in the US, in the South as well. Like, I don't know if I really see myself there now. So I'm happy in a way that while at the time it was quite crushing because obviously I had hoped to get in.
Why Duke?
I think partially it was... okay, the academic prestige, Duke is a good school. I thought, okay, it's a school, it's not, Harvard. While it's kind of in, the elite set, it's not an Ivy League, it's not like Yale, Harvard, Princeton. So I thought I had more of a chance of getting in. They had a good, social policy school and program, and I applied for that. So I think those were some of the, and interesting professors, and those were some of the factors that were might as well apply. I
think that does show, I'm very impressed that you went with Duke, which is obviously a very respectable school, but it also shows me that prestige isn't necessarily your sole driving force. Obviously, in terms of prestige, I think it's fair to say the Ivy League or Stanford, MIT would be right up there. So did you, when you make and conceptualize big life decisions, how do you weigh up the factors, say, from the world and peer pressure and prestige versus demographic, school fits, I feel like most people just don't really care about fit. They're well, I just go for the best. But you clearly didn't take that approach.
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, I'm at Cambridge, so it'd be a bit counterintuitive to say, I don't care about prestige, But I mean, it's, I think, in the subject I applied for, kind of education, social policy. I applied for international development at some unis. That in itself, is a subject that, rings a lot of questions of, you're not studying, law or medicine. What are you going to do with education? And then in terms of, I think, in the UK, I applied... Well, Cambridge was the most prestigious one I applied to, but I also applied to the University of Sussex, and SOAS, which are good schools. And I chose those because they're quite good for the subject. Are they known to everybody? Not necessarily. But that's where I really looked at, what would be good for my subject? Where do I kind of see myself? What do I want? And that was how I chose those, I guess. Yeah. And
do you consult? No pun intended. I'm sure Mum and Dad would be able to make great PowerPoints with 3 key points, but with disclaimers at the end.
Yeah.
No. We love a good consulting joke, but
Yep.
So do you consult other people when making big life decisions?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, absolutely. I can't deny that my parents are a huge influence, especially my mom. I'm still quite young because technically I should be near 13. I'm 18. And I think because I'm just that little bit younger, I still sometimes maybe care a little bit more about what my parents think. And my mom, she is in this kind of education, international development space. So she knows a lot about it. So she was a very influential person when it came to personal statements, when it came to choosing. Because actually at first, I was looking at HSPS at Cambridge.
Most
education students, I think, have that, right? Like, I was thinking more like, okay, politics, international relations, okay, HSPS. And it was, funnily enough, it was my mom who was like, oh, look, I think they have this education policy and development. And I thought, wait, this is so much more interesting. So obviously, while, you know, it was me who did put in the work, I do have to credit her with the fact that she found like that exact subject. Yeah.
So I guess this isn't a new debate at all, and it's something that puzzles perhaps all of us, that we all have to grapple with, and in fact our very subject grapples, all our essays about this tension between capitalism, the neoliberal world order that prioritizes a Western hegemonic modernity narrative and perspective versus a kind of, you know, Southern theory, like decolonial, like the critiquing the continuing coloniality,
critiquing like the World Bank,
IMF, structural adjustment programs, and all of that. So it's all very interesting and intellectually stimulating, but you do realize that when you then have to make your own career choices, I guess if you're like me, on the one hand, you may feel like you want to go into these NGOs, international organizations, but then you also, your very essays are critiquing how they actually continue the structural inequalities that you actually wanted to address. So it's almost like counterintuitive to then go in there and perpetuate this. Yeah. And then perhaps you with you know, women in business, that you feel like, yes, the system isn't perfect, but to drive change, it would be through business and through technology, through innovation. I'm not expressing myself very eloquently, but
no. I think you were phrasing it very well, actually, because I feel that tension very deeply. Yeah.
I guess in the US, or, you know, if I've read a lot into like Ivy Leagues, like student journalism, there's always like selling your soul, that debate. Yeah. Do you ever feel tensions in this regard, and walk me through your current thinking process?
Yeah. Oh no, I feel huge tensions because I've written a bunch of essays critiquing the World Bank, you know, neocolonialism, neoliberalism, and especially I find the kind of narrative we get from, you know, also from our professors, to be fair, is quite like a left-wing kind of very, like, that rhetoric of like, oh, in this capitalistic society, like, you know, justice can't be achieved. And I feel that, and I definitely, that's a side that I was like, oh, you know, wait, I wasn't really that aware to this. But then on the other hand, you know, I also think, so I did an internship at an NGO, and it was short, but what I realized, and I got a bit disillusioned because a lot of the work went around how do we find funding, you know, and it was so much of the brain power and the creative energy wasn't directed towards, you know, how can we make the world a better place? And it was, we need more funding. And I was like,
the marketing campaign.
Exactly. They're like, you know, who's going to be our next funding source? And I can't help but thinking, well, in like, I don't know, some kind of business, or if you can find some like philanthropic kind of thing where that can kind of sustain itself, I always think, wouldn't that be a more like realistic approach kind of? So I do struggle with that tension quite a bit. And also when I think about where I want to work in the future, you know, a part of me is like, do I, you know, go into, say, the World Bank, see what that's like from the inside? Because I always think, well, you know, we're critiquing them here, but it's not like they're stupid and don't understand the critiques of their own institution, right? Like I listened to an interview at the Union with Dambisa Moyo, who wrote Dead Aid, and critiquing, and obviously heavily critiquing the World Bank and the dependence and the kind of loans and the way that it fuels dependencies from, you know, kind of developing countries. And she was actually saying how the World Bank invited her, after she wrote that book, invited her back to speak on it. and they were interested in hearing her ideas. So it's not like they're completely oblivious to criticisms, and that's why I'm interested in seeing like, well, how do they kind of grapple with this? How does those big institutions?
So as you were critiquing, it's one thing to diagnose problem, which is very important to understand the nuances. But I guess equally as important, if we want to have tangible, practical progress, is having alternatives and different solutions. So as you critique them, do you feel like you're merely stopping at the critique, or do you actually feel like the existing, perhaps left-wing perspective also has very reasonable ways forward?
I'm gonna be honest, I think so far I've mostly stopped at the critique side of it. I think a lot of what I read seems to critique but doesn't offer that much in terms of alternatives. And I understand why, because, you know, alternatives are quite difficult, especially if you're trying to dismantle the kind of bigger system. It's like, wow, we first need to get like rid of capitalism for this to happen. But so I think right now I'm more in the stage of like trying to like understand the critique. But I do want to obviously understand, well, what can we do about this? Yeah.
I guess as you do more of the degree, and as I was telling you at the cafe, I don't think I fully grasp the many differences between the global north and the global south, if that's even a category at all.
Yeah.
But recently I think me just thinking about how to like categorize the different differences, and I know you haven't done the second and third year paper, but I think it might be quite relevant. And my question to you, I'm going to read out maybe some of, like just share some of my recent categorizations, but then my question to you is, do you see the possibility, are the differences that I'm about to share with you mutually exclusive, or could they be complementary? So I'm taking a framework on Southern and it's Southern series by Connell, which is one of the key works of decolonial or decolonial, I think, theories. And I think what he did was that he separated the difference between North and South in terms of the different categories of, number one, epistemology. So Northern theory is often based on like a positivist epistemology that prioritizes objectivity and neutrality with science, while Southern theory is based on like interpretive epistemologies that emphasize like context, subjectivity, diversity, with ethnographies. So the second point is on like methodology. Northern theories often use like quantitative methods that aim to like generalize and universalize, findings across populations, while Southern theories use qualitative methods that prioritize like depth and nuance, and they focus on like specific populations and context. They also differ in the third category of focus. Northern theory focuses on like individual behavior and psychology, while Southern theory focuses on like collective action, social structure, and historical context. The fourth category is like agency. Northern theory often assumes a high degree of agency and choice on part of the individuals, while Southern theory often emphasizes the constraints on agency imposed by social structures, power relations, and historical legacies. The fifth category is positionality. Northern theory often assumes like a universal perspective that is like detached from the social location and positionality of the researcher, while Southern theory emphasizes the importance of reflexivity and acknowledges like the role that the researcher have, like their positionality in shaping their knowledge production process. And the final category is like the source of knowledge. Northern theory relies on like academic journals and other mainstream sources of knowledge, while Southern theory draw on a broader range of sources, including like local knowledge, indigenous knowledge, and the experience of marginalized groups. So there's clear, obviously this is a simplistic dichotomy, but how do you potentially see two different approaches, two ways of worldviews intersecting in the modern future world?
Wow, I learned a lot just within that. So, I think a lot of what I've been reading as well centers on kind of how these northern epistemologies are taken as like the norm and this kind of way of thinking. And unfortunately, I feel like that's been maybe also a pitfall of like, if you're looking at the application of that, maybe certain like NGOs, organizations, you know, assume a certain model of things you mentioned, decontextualization, objectivity, and maybe fall into this pitfall of, oh, you can replicate a certain model of, say, education, or a certain model, you know, in every kind of, in different countries. And like there's this focus on like, how can we scale things, right? How can we, you know, have an intervention or like something and scale it? And I think that's obviously, while, you know, I understand the thing with, okay, you want to have an impact, I think that's where a lot can go wrong, because of this lack of taking into account, you know, as you mentioned, like context, certain structural barriers, looking at very much, well, you know, what are individual people here saying? And I think they don't have to be mutually exclusive. I think there's opportunity for it to intersect. I think a starting point is definitely the idea of positionality, right? Where an individual researcher has to understand what perspective they're coming from, how their upbringing and ideas have shaped, you know, their research question, for example, and the way they go about their research, because it's never going to be fully objective, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's an important place to start if you want to look at kind of merging or somehow blending these two ways of thinking.
Does this excite you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, honestly, I you know, I do really love my subject, and things like this make me like see the world in a different way, and like contextualize the world in a different way.
Yeah, I think the Cambridge education degree is very underrated and a bit disrespected at times.
Yeah, I agree.
Is it teaching training?
Yeah.
But it's actually like our course is always like examining education through the lens of different disciplines like sociology, politics, philosophy, psychology, and it's actually quite interdisciplinary. It's actually quite
definitely.
I do wish it was a little more quantitative, but still, I think I've learned a lot from the readings and the critiques.
No,
So,
I agree.
So heading, actually before exams, your podcast, I think it's just a phenomenal, like I was telling you earlier, I feel like you're a few years younger, but you're also like actually a few years ahead of me. Which is, you know, credit to you, and I'm just so...
Thank you.
Just impressed by your high levels of initiative, your creativity. It's like everything that you have pretended and that you've been predicted has almost come true. But in terms of the podcast, you started it, I believe, or at least first episode was June 18th, 2020.
Yeah.
It's no longer active, so I had to find more creative means of actually finding out more about the podcast. But the tagline you used was a podcast by young adults for young adults. Yeah. The episodes that you had included like Black Lives Matter, racism, BLM, racist structure, what it means to be happy, street harassment, objectification of gender roles, racism in international schools in Hong Kong, what to do when school gets overwhelming, reusable menstrual products, period poverty, you know, Asians and model minority myth, which is actually my dissertation. You talked about mental health, news, book recommendations, US politics. You talked to a Harvard grad about, you know, their foundation against modern slavery. You know, just, it's so cool. And I was really pleased to see you being like invited to the Hong Kong Youth Summit as an exhibitor, featured on Pixel and all that kind of stuff. Just walk me through like what got you started on the podcast and what did you learn from undertaking that project?
Yeah. So, I wish I could, you know, put myself back in like 2020 Angelina's brain, because sometimes I forget, you know, the exact like motivations and what my thought process was. But a lot of that came from, it was sparked by the murder of George Floyd and then the ensuing Black Lives Matter movement. And because I just felt this deep anger at like the injustices of the world, basically. And I just wanted to like have conversations about it, but not just, oh, I'm going to talk to someone, but be able to share that conversation with others to kind of almost create like a greater sense of dialogue. and it started off because when I started, I really didn't know where I was going to take it. And I think the name reflects that, right? On my mind, it can be interpreted in 1,000 different ways. So I didn't really have a clear, line of, I don't know, like structure for it. Like I think yours is I admire it because I feel like yours has a lot more, like structure and thought behind it. And then mine was just more like, let's see where this goes. So initially it started off as like, hey, let me just, talk to basically my friends and see what they have to say about this. And then it evolved into something a little bit more, I guess, structured in the sense that I was like, oh, you know what, I want to interview quote unquote change makers. What I find in Hong Kong, at least, there were a lot of students who had started their own initiatives, their own organizations, their own projects. And so I thought, hey, you know what, let me talk to these students who, are passionate about something and have started something because of that, because I want to understand the kind of mindset that goes into, creating your own organization for whatever purpose that might be, and why people are passionate about certain things. And so I had those conversations and learned a lot through that. So it was a very valuable experience and project.
How did you go about preparing the episode? I'm sure I can take a few tips.
So what I do is, I think similarly to you, like first, I think the big thing was always thinking about, well, who do I want to contact? And I think you've done a better job of simplifying that system with the nominations form. So I would kind of do a little bit of like research, try and go on platforms where like a lot of change makers were kind of, I don't know, exhibited or mentioned. And then I would contact them through Instagram usually. And, I'd prepare kind of some questions. And then it was actually at the time, it was almost all of the interviews were over Zoom, because it was COVID. But, I think I would have had more fun having that really like personal aspect of like, face-to-face conversation. So I'd prepare questions and kind of go through that. And then obviously I had to like figure out the whole like, okay, editing software and then publishing all that like by myself. But it actually...
Learn by doing.
Yeah, learn by doing. And what I realized, it's because, people are like, wow, you have a podcast. And I was like, yeah, it's actually not like most people could create a podcast with little effort, to be honest. Like, it's actually not as maybe complex as some people might think.
And why is it now deactivated?
Yeah,
Are you cancelled?
No, I think the main reason was to be honest, and I wish I had more like motivation to keep it going, but I think life kind of got in the way. IB got in the way, if I'm being honest. Like I just got really busy, and at some point I thought, I think my passion for it maybe dropped off a little bit. And there was always part of me that wanted to maybe like revive it and restart it, but I think if I were to do that, I would want to basically like give it a new name, a new kind of cover photo, like just a new kind of brand and imaging. So that's something that maybe, in the future I'd like to do. But I've also played around with the idea of having a poetry podcast.
Ooh, that'll be awesome.
Because, I do think that poetry is a medium that is supposed to be listened to. So, that might be a thing I might consider doing. But yeah.
So you mentioned before, the deep injustice of the world. Like I saw it in your facial expression.
Yeah.
How much it still boils you, even though you have a smile. But I can see through your eyes just how much you wanted to pursue righteousness and goodness.
Yes. Yeah.
A lot of different, obviously strands of injustices that you touch on in your podcast, in your own readings. Is there a particular focus, say like feminism or racism, that you feel like particularly resonates and speaks to you?
Oh, that's a good question. See, I wish I could give like a clear answer to that, but I think one of the kind of maybe crises I've had in the past couple of months is that I feel like I'm not like extremely passionate about one specific thing. So I'm not, I would consider myself a feminist, but I don't know, I almost don't feel like the authority to say, this is something that I'm like an authority on and this is me. So because I'm just interested in like a wide kind of array of things. Obviously being a woman, I would say gender injustices, gender inequalities are definitely a big focus. And I'm very quite interested in looking at how they intersect with education. So like women's barriers to accessing education. I'm quite interested in the idea of like period poverty. Like that's a theme that I would like to delve more into. Racial injustices are also one that I'm very interested in. That kind of
A broad question, which gives you a chance to elaborate, but what do you think are the causes of injustices in the world?
Wow. Well, I think I can take this down like my readings, but yeah, I mean, increasingly, if you asked me like a year ago to talk about what capitalism was, I couldn't really tell you. And I think now that I've kind of learned more about like the idea of like kind of global capitalism, globalization, in the sense that those in power want to kind of maintain that position. And so,
but why? Is that just human nature?
I guess. That's one that I haven't thought about that much, but in the sense that, I think, there's this quote that resonates with me is like, to those who've always had access to things, equity feels like exclusion, kind of, right? Like all of a sudden, if, it brings up the whole question of like affirmative action in the US, or also, the trends here were like, admitting more people from like maybe like lower socioeconomic backgrounds, like state schools, right? To those who've always had that kind of like elite privilege, that might feel like some form of like exclusion or like reverse discrimination. Ooh, it's a deep question. It's true. I think it's one that, like, especially in our course, we always talk about injustice, inequalities in this sense, inequalities in that sense. But then thinking about like the root causes of.
So I guess like you talking about like gender injustices, like you being a woman, you have that personal connection. So say if we now move on to like Asians and the model minority myth, which is briefly for context, so Asians are minorities, but Asians are not treated as other minorities. They are labelled as so-called model minority, and it seems like a compliment because it's like, oh, we recognise that on average you have higher education, higher income, and all that kind of stuff. So you're a model minority, but in reality, as my dissertation argues, hopefully I do well. Hopefully it's a model essay. No, it's not. But in reality, that is often used as a means of justifying discrimination against Asian, such as in the form of, not giving them funding, not giving them recognition. So Asians are disproportionately unrepresented in leadership roles. And what this does is it also implicates the well-being of Asians, because it's great that if you are an Asian who got a 45 in IB, good at math, going to MIT, top physicist, that's great. Yeah. But most Asians are actually not that, understandably. But then, all these jokes that Asians hear, like, oh, you're an Asian, not a Bayesian, why are you not getting top grades in math, which all sound very playful, but when you add in the expectation and all of this, it actually has a very pernicious effect on mental health and aspirations and career choices and life decision. So for you, I don't think you're Asian.
I am not. I am.
When you then hear the perspective of a group that you don't personally identify with, how do you go about empathizing and relating?
Ooh, well, that's a very good question. I think, I want to kind of place that in the broader context of, like moving to Hong Kong, I think really, really shaped my perspective on kind of like racial injustices and what it means to be kind of a minority, because having been in Switzerland, the majority is white, right? So I was in the majority, I was looking around, people looked like me all the time. And then moving to Hong Kong, I was a minority, obviously expat, so it's a very different type of minority in the sense that it's more of a kind of privileged minority. But just that context of looking around you and you see maybe one or two people that look like you, right? So all of a sudden I was like, oh, hold on. Obviously, while I'm never going to kind of understand what it feels like to be discriminated against, that feeling of not having the same kind of representation is something where I was like, oh wait, you know, it was like a reshifting of kind of mentality. And most of my friends in Hong Kong were Asian, were, you know, mostly from Hong Kong or Hong Kong Canadians. And it was this kind of thing where I would then kind of be like, I would hear, you know, oh, you're so white. Like it was all playful. But it was like, yeah, I don't know.
It's a bit alienating.
Yeah. And then I think I kind of started, I'm wary of saying like, oh, empathizing, because again, it's a very different context, but it does help you
to be an other, be different.
To know what it feels like to be quote unquote other than not the majority. And I think that gave me maybe some sort of, helped me maybe like empathize, or at least like gain a lot of interest in what that's like as well, and you know, gain interest in like the model minority myth and how that plays out. Yeah,
like I've personally, like, I won't go into like deep anecdotes, but it's just like these backhanded compliments like, oh, you're so good at basketball, which, you know, obviously when we hear compliments like, great, and then people feel the need to, for an Asian.
Yeah. Like, oh.
You're so tall for an Asian.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, if I get good grades, like, well, of course.
Right, because
Yeah, but it's like, actually, I feel like I've also had to work really hard. And I think where it comes most, like, when it hurt me the most, like, mentally growing up, and I don't think I'm as affected by it now as I used to, but it's like leadership roles. Like, I have heard people say that, you know, like, oh, if I just don't, like, you just don't seem like a president or a leader. Like, it's like, but then they're like, and then I've learned to ask them, well, okay, well, if you strip away, like, my face and all that kind of stuff, if it was just objective CV.
Right.
And you didn't know what race, it was like colorblind and all that kind of stuff. They're like, well, yeah, then you probably, like, you know what I mean?
Interesting.
Like, so I've actually heard that quite a few times in like my Cambridge Union campaign last year, where oh, like, I get it, you've done a lot, you've achieved a lot, and you're a great guy, but it's just like, I don't know, I haven't seen someone like you hold that role. And it's not a unique problem, because like women as well, it's that representation. If you haven't seen a female CEO, if you haven't been led by a female leader, then obviously a female just doesn't fit that conceptualization. Whereas, again, generalizing, I'm not critiquing anyone, or no, I'm not criticizing anyone. Yeah. But it's like, you have seen these white men hold these roles. So it's like, when you see a white man run for president, it's like, well, yeah, like, I have seen that happen before. So for you, is representation ever an issue that you have worried about or thought about?
Definitely. I think, again, just because, you know, I am a woman, I think a big part of it is obviously, like female leadership is something you mentioned. And I think that's also why I got involved in Cambridge Women in Business, because that really resonated with me, that idea of like being, you know, maybe like a woman in business potentially. And I've had some really insightful, like I went to their International Women's Day event, and there were some really cool like female, top like female leaders there. And just hearing their insights about what it's like to be a woman in the workplace, especially a woman, you know, a mother in the workplace also brings in a whole new dynamic to it. And I mean, in the future I'd like to be a mother maybe, so right, like that's something that like I think about a lot, and I think about like the structural kind of barriers that are there, so the prejudices.
Like, so take this assumption that you really want to be a mother, but you also really want to have a successful business career. Do you feel like there's a trade-off in the sense that you need to wait to establish your career first, and is that a problem that affects you?
I'd say it's not a current problem, but it is something I think about a bit. And it is because I've had conversations with friends, and I have a good friend here actually. She's very, very cool. And she does computer science, and she's told me that she doesn't want children, because she feels like it would interfere with her career. She wants to, you know, just focus on her career. Wow. And that was really fascinating to me. I was like, wow. And I've, and I mean, you know, the example I have in my own life, my mom, she was like yeah, in terms of career, she was doing quite well when I was really young, basically. And I think I'd like to talk to her more about it now, seeing how, like, you know, how do you balance that? How do you balance, and because obviously there might be, I don't know, feelings of stress and of guilt of like, am I dedicating enough to my child? Am I dedicating enough to my career? So yeah, that is a tension that I think I'm gonna encounter, and I don't think it's like irreconcilable. Like, I think, you know, you can do both, but it also just means that you will encounter new kind of challenges. Yeah.
That's also partly what makes life worthwhile and meaningful, is that it is these daily choices that ultimately come to define who we are as people and the kind of lives that we want to lead.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I guess I have kind of came to this realization, I said not a realization, but a more firm belief that family and career are not mutually exclusive. And in fact, if you, like, obviously when the right person comes in, you don't want to force it, have a family for the sake of being married. But like, if you can actually meet the right person that complements one another and actually have a stable family, it could actually help your career, right?
Yeah, no, that's very true. That's very true.
It doesn't always have to be, okay, once I get made partner, then I can do a
then
family.
I can, yeah.
Then once I'm with my kid, I'm only with my kid. It's like, life is this
intersecting,
and that is fun. Like, if life is without any of these daily tensions and challenges, then what's the point?
I think that's a good way of looking at it, actually. If it doesn't have to be perfect, and it's gonna all, you know,
and I guess
intersect.
Like the only moment when perhaps everything is pretty certain is maybe deep into retirement, just before.
True. Yeah. No, that's true. Yeah.
So, do you feel quite optimistic about your future then?
I do. I think generally I have the tendency to be an optimistic person, and I am proud of myself and how far I've gotten, but I also recognize that a lot of my achievements are due to just amazing, like, opportunities I've been given. A lot of it is luck. A lot of it is just, you know, the people I have around me have shaped me and have helped me to get to where I am today. So I'm really grateful for that, and I think that, you know, hopefully that this kind of continues, and there will be downfalls, there will be rejections, and that's okay.
Redirections, you mean?
Redirections, exactly. But no, I'm excited. I think right now I don't know exactly what I want to do. I know I have friends who know, literally, like, I was talking to my friend the other day, and she said, you know, I have a 5-year plan for after I graduate, and she has a very clear, like, future laid out, and I just thought, oh wow, I don't know what I want to do exactly, but I think that's nice to just be open-minded and see where things take you, and stay curious, I guess.
Yeah, I guess it's probably good to have a plan, but at the same time realizing that plans don't always work out because there's just so many variables. Yeah. You probably didn't see yourself sitting here in my room having a coffee with me, you know, even just a month ago.
That's true. Yeah, for sure.
I guess in the context, giving you a legacy-worthy interview, you know, a piece of recording that captures a snapshot of who you are now, that you can look back in 10, 20 years' time and say, I was so naive. We've touched on quite a few different things, and it's been really fun. I've really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
But are there any other things that you feel like you want to be captured in this recording, or else I've got a few final broad ones to conclude?
I think from my end, not necessarily. You've done a very good job of, like, picking out key things in my life, so yeah.
Thank you so much. I guess third to last, but I reserve the right to add questions. It's so interesting. I did tell you I don't pre-prepare questions. So, what are some principles, like overarching principles that have or you want to guide your life? So they're not like specific concrete decision, but like very overarching principles or frameworks that you really value.
Okay, so I think one big one is open-mindedness. Being open-minded to opportunities, experiences, saying yes to a lot of things. It's a big one. Listening, and I love like hearing about people's lives and what people have done and what has shaped them, what has shaped their identity. So I love just asking people questions and and listening to people in that sense. And then the last one is like fake it till you make it. So just this idea of, it sounds maybe a bit toxic, but just this idea of like, sometimes you don't quite know what you're doing, but it's about like pretending that you do. And then at some point it happens and you're like, wow, wait, I did that. And I didn't really think I could do that, but I kind of just did. So sometimes it's about, even if you don't feel confident in a situation, appearing confident, right? And just kind of telling yourself, right, I look like I'm going to be confident in this. And if I look like it, then I might as well be it, you know? It's like sometimes you're not going to have full trust in everything.
So what's something that other people would be surprised that you're kind of so-called faking it at the moment, if you're willing to share?
Oh, I'm trying to think. I think maybe like I act quite chill when it comes to things like, exams and, you know, all that. But I'm deeply stressed. I have like a constant kind of headache because of that stress. Like my body's affected, like I can feel it. But I've decided to take on this like chill persona, like, it's
we'll
gonna be fine. Yeah, exactly. But deep inside there's a lot of stress. So I think that's one of those.
We're both masking it quite well.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, second to last question, like, you're clearly a seeker of life and emotions and truth and experiences, and you appreciate the variety of experiences that both differentiates us and unites us all. So what so far has been perhaps like a philosophy or religion? You mentioned you're not spiritual, but I think you are. But I don't want to engage in a language game of what that means. But I think, like, what would you say is so far the best diagnosis of the human condition?
Ooh, what do you mean by diagnosis of the human condition?
Like, what have you found? Like, you know, Christians, for example, would find the Bible. You know, the Quran, maybe like a different religion. You know, the Islamic tradition. Or like other people might find like Stoicism, a philosophy, a school of thought. So which kind of category or things have you found to most align, or that you try and base your life around? Maybe not fully, but that has resonated with you the most in, because I think this is every religion, every culture throughout history, people try and seek that capital T truth. Yeah. And for you, I know you're on a journey, only 18 now. Yeah. What has resonated the most?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So, I'm not, I in terms of religion, like I am Christian in the sense that I've had my baptism, and then...
How old were you when you were baptized?
5 or 6.
Okay, so it was a child baptism.
Yeah, and then I had my, I don't know if that's how you say it, it's like confirmation, I guess, when I was 13, 14.
Was that a conscious choice then?
So the kind of paradox here is that I think because my parents had theirs, and it was kind of like a thing of like, okay, then I'm gonna do it. And I did think about, like, they didn't force me to. I could, if I didn't want to, they wouldn't have forced me to.
So they're Christians?
They are, yes, but not, I would say in our family life, religion isn't, it's more so maybe like a symbolic aspect, in the sense that at Christmas we go to church, or like during Easter maybe.
Do they pray? Or?
So when I was younger, actually, my dad my dad and I would pray like before going to bed. And there's this like prayer that we would recite. Wow. And I did quite enjoy that. I think that was, and you know, maybe it has kind of more subconsciously shaped me, not so much consciously, because I wouldn't consider myself deeply religious, but I do think that that idea of just being like gratitude, I think, is a big like, it's very much something emphasized through that. and just like trust that it'll work out, it'll be okay, like that kind of guiding principle. And yeah, I don't know, I wouldn't, again, I'm not super religious, but I do believe in the power of just like introspection. I think what I find really important is like connecting with nature, being outside, being alone outside as well, like just, you know, taking a moment to appreciate what's around you, and detaching yourself from it. And yeah, I guess, I don't know, in a way poetry is a little bit of a spiritual guide for me as well. Just like hearing other people's voices. And
in a sense, like, I've looked more into religion, and religion, I think, religious ways of knowing, as we learn from talk, is very much more of a Southern theory thing, right, where it isn't always, you can't like run a controlled trial usually, but does that really mean that it's not true? Like, does truth has to be from a scientific Western modernity perspective, or can our intuition, can our thought processes, can our personal relationship with nature, with spiritual things be true? And I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
I do think lots of people try and portray science or scientific method as objective, but I'm starting to realise that's not very neutral.
No, absolutely not. No, yeah, it's true.
I think ultimately probably a combination of both is necessary.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Wow, very deep, interesting, I guess.
Yeah.
With open-mindedness being a core principle of yours, I'm quite interested to hear how you would answer that question in a year, 5 year, 10 years, 20 years time.
Oh yeah, me too. No, definitely. I'm really interested in seeing how that changes, or maybe it doesn't. I don't know. Yeah.
Final question then. What's one message, quote, or saying you wish every teacher, parent, nanny would promote, and every child would internalize? So your message to the world, capturing all the different experiences you've shared, you know, in Zurich, in Hong Kong, in the UK, in France, like all the things that you've been through with IB, with dance, with your podcast, with your poetry, the ups and downs, the aspirations you've had, the thinking processes of like applying to getting into Northwestern and coming to Cambridge. Like, you've done a lot of very interesting and diverse things. So
I love that little summary of my life though, so that was quite beautiful, like a little,
That was actually one of the feedback I got a month ago. Someone was like, you know, like, it would be nice, like, before you ask the final question to like remind us
of everything.
And I think it's maybe helpful for you.
I was like, oh wow, yeah, that's me.
It also forces me to listen. Yeah, so I mean, given all of that, you know, music as well, tennis, just
wow. I think reflect, and like live, enjoy, have fun, and give. I would say a big one, like what I mentioned, I think kindness, but while kind of protecting your inner peace. I don't know, I think that's my life philosophy in a way, and I think that's just a really nice way of encompassing this idea that you can both be a giving, open person while also maintaining your own happiness in a way.
That's beautiful. It's been so lovely meeting you, and it was such a fun, deep, diverse discussion, and well done again, I guess, on all your achievements and for being nominated. I mean, you know, someone, Andre, was it?
Andre, yes, yeah.
You know, someone had to go on the form, right? Like, it's a very active, you can't just fall into this, and I think that in itself, I think, is an act of kindness that
absolutely.
I hope you can appreciate, because it would be from your positive influence on the world. So
thank
really
you, Andre.
And I wish you well for the exams, and indeed they don't matter, but they do matter, but they don't matter, but they do.
It's the whole thing. It's the whole thing.
It will be great. I think this degree is, I've gained a lot of appreciation through it, and I look back at my first year essay, go, ugh, yuck. Perhaps yours won't be as bad as mine, but I'm sure that it will give you a lot of new insights and ways of thinking about the world. And I'm excited for you, and I hope we can have more conversations in the future.
Definitely.
Yeah,
definitely.
Really nice to meet you.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for this conversation. I had a great time. Thank you.